The air inside the SUV is thick with a different kind of cold, the icy silence of a marriage falling apart. Chloe and her husband, Thomas, are driving through a relentless blizzard in the remote mountains, headed to a weekend getaway that was supposed to fix things. But the arguments haven't stopped. The road is a treacherous ribbon of black ice and blinding white snow, and the tension between them is a ticking time bomb. Thomas is driving too fast, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, while Chloe clutches her seat, her mind racing through the secrets she's been keeping. Then, in a heartbeat, the world flips. A deer, a patch of ice, a scream, and the car plunges off the embankment, tumbling into the dark ravine below. When Chloe regains consciousness, the world is upside down. The smell of gasoline and frozen earth fills her lungs. Thomas is slumped beside her, unconscious, blood trickling down his forehead. They are miles from the nearest town. Their phones have no signal, and the blizzard is erasing their tracks. Chloe manages to drag Thomas from the wreckage, her body screaming in pain, only to realize that the crash wasn't just an accident of nature. As she looks at the tire tracks in the dashboard, she notices something chilling. The brake lines didn't just fail. They look like they were tampered with. The fear of the cold is suddenly replaced by a much sharper fear of the man lying next to her, Oz. They are stranded in a white void, surrounded by towering pines that look like jagged teeth against the gray sky. Every shadow seems to move, and the howling wind sounds like a human cry. Chloe tries to wake Thomas, but when he finally opens his eyes, he doesn't look at her with relief. He looks at her with a terrifying, vacant suspicion. He claims he can't remember the last hour before the crash. He doesn't remember the argument. He doesn't remember why they were even on this road. Chloe is trapped in a frozen wilderness with a man who might be a stranger, or worse, a man who knows exactly what he did. The first act ends as night begins to fall. The temperature is dropping to lethal levels, and they have no shelter. Just as Chloe is about to give up hope, she sees a flickering light through the trees. A small, isolated cabin, Oz. It's their only chance at survival, but as they limp toward the glowing window, Chloe can't shake the feeling that they aren't being saved. They are simply moving from one trap to another. The crash was the beginning of the end, and the real nightmare is about to start behind closed doors. The cabin isn't the cozy refuge Chloe imagined as. It's a primitive structure of rotting logs and dust, smelling of damp cedar and long-forgotten secrets. There is no phone, no internet, and the only heat comes from an ancient wood-burning stove that Thomas struggles to light. As the blizzard seals the doors with snow, the cabin becomes a pressure cooker. Thomas grows increasingly erratic, his head injury supposedly causing gaps in his memory, yet he becomes strangely defensive whenever Chloe asks about the car's failure. Chloe's survival instincts move from the cold outside to the man inside. Every time he picks up the heavy fire poker, she finds herself measuring the distance to the door. While Thomas is occupied in the shed looking for more wood, Chloe begins to explore the small space. In a locked drawer in the kitchen, she finds something that makes her blood turn to ice. A collection of Polaroids. They aren't photos of the cabin's owner. They are surveillance photos of her. Photos of her at work, at the grocery store, and even sleeping in her own bed, taken from an angle that suggests they were shot from within her own home. The realization hits her like a physical blow. The romantic getaway wasn't Thomas's attempt to save their marriage. It was a carefully planned abduction. But as she flips to the last photo, she sees something even more confusing. A picture of Thomas, taken from a distance, with a red X drawn over his face. The psychological warfare escalates when Thomas returns. He finds Chloe holding the photos, but instead of attacking her, he breaks down. He claims he found the same photos in Chloe's handbag weeks ago, and that he is the one who is terrified. He accuses her of being the stalker, of gaslighting him into this trip to kill him and claim the insurance money. In this desolate cabin, truth becomes a liquid thing. Chloe looks at her husband and sees a victim. A moment later, she looks at him and sees a cold-blooded killer. Every word out of his mouth feels like a calculated lie, and she realizes that one of them is playing a masterpiece of a game. Act 2 reaches its breaking point when the owner of the cabin is found. Not alive, but tucked away in a shallow crawl space beneath the floorboards. It's a woman, her clothes similar to Chloe's, her face frozen in a mask of terror. She didn't die from the cold, she was strangled. Chloe realizes that this cabin isn't just a random shelter, it's a killing ground. The crash wasn't the first attempt, and it won't be the last. As the fire in the stove dies down and the shadows stretch across the room, Chloe realizes she is trapped with a murderer who has done this before. The only question remains: is she trapped with the man she married, or is there someone else in the woods watching them both? The silence of the cabin is broken by a sudden, jarring sound. Not the wind, but a phone buzzing. It's not Chloe's, and it's not Thomas's. Chloe follows the sound to Thomas's discarded, blood-stained coat. Tucked into a secret lining is a second phone, one she has never seen. As she scrolls through the messages, the memory gaps Thomas claimed to have started to look like a deliberate, lethal performance. The messages are from an unknown contact, detailing the exact coordinates of the ravine where they crashed. The last message, sent just minutes before the impact, reads, "Finish it. Make it look like an accident." Chloe's heart hammers against her ribs. The man sitting across the room, tending the fire, isn't her husband. He's a hired executioner. But as Chloe prepares to strike him with a heavy glass bottle, Thomas speaks, his voice low and eerily calm. He doesn't beg for his life. Instead, he starts reciting details of Chloe's own secret life. The offshore accounts she's been draining. The business trips that were actually meetings with a private investigator to have him killed. He reveals that he knew about the brake lines because he was the one who saw her tampering with them in the garage the night before. He didn't crash the car to kill her. He crashed it to stop her from driving them both off a cliff. In this room, there are no heroes. There are only two predators who have finally realized they are sharing the same cage. The tension reaches a fever pitch when the owner of the cabin, the dead woman under the floorboards, is finally identified. Chloe finds her ID in a discarded purse. The woman is Thomas's first wife, the one he claimed had disappeared years ago after a bitter divorce. The patterns of the Polaroids and the surveillance start to blur. Chloe realizes that Thomas didn't just stumble upon this cabin. He brought her here because this is where he discards his mistakes. But Thomas turns the tables again, pointing out that Chloe's fingerprints are already all over the cabin's kitchen, on the very knife that likely killed the woman. He's been framing her for a murder she didn't even know happened. Act 3 culminates in a terrifying physical confrontation. As the fire flares up, casting monstrous shadows on the walls, The power of the storm outside pales in comparison to the violence inside. Chloe realizes that the only way to survive is to stop playing the victim and embrace the darkness Thomas thinks he owns. She lures him toward the cellar, the very place where his secrets are buried. But just as she prepares to shove him into the dark, a hand reaches out from the shadows of the hallway. A third person who has been watching them the entire time. The crash wasn't a duel. It was a three-way game of death, Ardas. And the true architect of the nightmare has finally decided to show their face. The shadow in the hallway steps into the flickering light, and Chloe's world shatters for the final time. It's not a stranger. It's her sister, Sarah. The one person Chloe trusted with all her secrets. The one person who knew about the offshore accounts and the plan to leave Thomas. But Sarah isn't there to save her. She is holding a gun, and she is looking at Thomas with a terrifying, familiar affection. The crash wasn't a botched murder attempt by a husband or a wife. It was a grand performance orchestrated by Sarah. She didn't just want Thomas. She wanted Chloe's life, her money, on her husband, all while making Chloe the perfect villain in a tragic accident. The truth pours out like ice water. Sarah was the one who tampered with the brakes, knowing the specific stretch of road where the car would fail. She was the unknown contact sending the messages, gaslighting both of them into believing the other was a killer. The woman under the floorboards? That was Sarah's first mistake. A hitchhiker she used to test the cabin's isolation weeks ago. Sarah's plan was simple. The traumatized husband survives a crash that kills his unstable wife, and Sarah steps in to comfort him and manage the inheritance. But the crash didn't kill Chloe, and now Sarah has to clean up the loose ends herself. But Sarah underestimated the one thing that binds a toxic marriage together: the instinct for mutual survival. In a split second of unspoken understanding, Chloe and Thomas, the two people who spent the last 3 acts trying to kill each other, realize that they are the only allies they have left. As Sarah prepares to pull the trigger, Thomas lunges, using his memory-addled state as a distraction. The struggle is brief and brutal. The fire from the stove spills onto the dry floorboards, and the cabin that was their cage becomes an inferno. Chloe doesn't hesitate. She doesn't reach for Sarah, and she doesn't reach for Thomas. She reaches for the burner phone, the only evidence of the conspiracy. The story concludes with a chilling image. Chloe stands alone on the snowy embankment, watching the cabin burn into a pillar of fire against the black mountain sky. There are no sirens, only the crackle of wood and the howling wind. When the authorities finally arrive, they find a grieving, battered widow who, miraculously, survived a crash and a fire that claimed her husband and her heroic sister who tried to save them. Chloe sits in the back of the ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, her face a mask of perfect, tragic sorrow. In her pocket, she feels the weight of the phone and the secret of what really happened in the cellar. She didn't just survive the crash, she inherited the kingdom,